everyone. This is Inside the Americas. The U.S. midterms saw more of a pink wave this week than a red one, as Joe Biden's Democrats fared better than expected. In today's show, Monte Francis will be breaking down the results so far. We'll also take a look at the effect the vote will have on the last 2 years of Joe Biden's term. I'm Jeannie Godula. Well, America was all about the midterms this week. Tuesday's vote was much less of a disaster for the Democrats than the Republicans may have been hoping. The GOP does look on track to win the House of Representatives and block much of President Joe Biden's agenda for the last 2 years of his term. France 24's Monte Francis joins me on set now to talk a bit more about all of this. And Monte, this was not the red wave that it seemed everybody was predicting.
It certainly was not. And I think the thing to watch, Jeannie, is how Republicans are reacting to all of this. Donald Trump is already out on his social media site making accusations about the legitimacy of the results. It's important to remember that a majority of the Republican candidates running for office in this midterm election denied the results of the 2020 race. They don't consider Joe Biden to be a legitimate president. So there are GOP candidates who have lost. They're challenging the results of their own elections, and they're basically just taking a page out of the Donald Trump playbook.
And what about Donald Trump himself? What do these election results, as we see them so far, say about his influence on American politics?
I think it means he may not be the kingmaker or the queenmaker that he thinks that he is. Having said that, many of the Republican candidates he backed did not win. Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, for example. There were others like Brian Kemp, who won the governorship in Georgia without the explicit backing or support of Donald Trump. But having said that, the Republican Party, as it stands right now, is still very much the party of Donald Trump.
This is the year we're going to take back the House.
In 2022, Republican candidates are still talking about 2020. One by one, they're lining up behind Donald Trump, embracing his false claim of a rigged election 2 years ago that he lost to Joe Biden.
I think Trump won in 2020.
In fact, a vast majority of Republicans running for federal and state offices have either questioned or flat out denied the 2020 results. 70%, according to the New York Times, some 370 GOP candidates. A demonstration that Trump has not lost his grip on his party.
Donald Trump maintains a certain power because he has a personal influence, a kind of charisma, even though more and more people think it's a kind of perverted charisma. Nevertheless, it counts.
There are already indications that Republican candidates will use the same Trump strategy and refuse to accept the results of their own races. Kari Lake, who's running for governor in Arizona, has refused to say that she would concede if she loses.
My question is, will you accept the results of your election in November?
I'm going to win the election, and I will accept that result.
If you lose, will you accept that?
I'm going to win the election, and I will accept that result.
In addition to Lake, 6 other Republican candidates running for governor across the U.S. have also denied the 2020 results. The worry, say experts, is that they, along with election officials in those states, could wield influence over future contests and potentially overturn legitimate election results. While most GOP candidates for Senate and House seats have backed Trump's election claims, a few Republicans have stood up to Donald Trump. Liz Cheney, a senator from Wyoming, an outspoken critic of the former president, has already been expelled from the party, having lost her primary to a Trump-endorsed candidate. Voters, meanwhile, appear apathetic. A recent poll by the New York Times found that most Americans feel that U.S. democracy is under threat, but that inflation and the economy are more pressing concerns.
Monte, let me bring you back in here. Donald Trump, widely expected to announce he is running for president again for 2024, but there's already talk about another Republican favorite who could challenge him, and that's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Well, yes, and DeSantis just won a huge re-election victory in Florida, beating his Democratic opponent, Charlie Crist, by almost 20 points. We know that he's already under Donald Trump's skin because, Trump is obsessed with these 2024 polls, and he's given DeSantis a nickname, Ron DeSanctimonious. We had to expect that coming. DeSantis is a very shrewd politician. He was educated at Yale, Harvard Law. Also, he injects himself into national culture wars. He constantly rails against what he calls woke ideology. And during the pandemic, he was very outspoken against mask mandates. The New Yorker said of him that he, quote, channels the same rage as the former president, but with greater discipline. And I should underscore that he has not said whether he will make a run for the White House 2 years from now.
Thanks, Monty. Now, American voters are not known for their huge turnout at the polls, but this midterm election certainly pushed a lot of people to cast their ballots early. Almost 46 million people voted early, either with mail-in votes or in person, higher than in 2018, with the Democrats really coming out more than the Republicans. And while abortion may have been one of the big issues in the campaign, that was really overshadowed by the economy, as Karis Garland reports.
It's on many voters' minds and a word on many Americans' lips.
Well, I think inflation.
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 After peaking just above 9% in June, inflation remained high at 8.2% in September, and consumers are feeling the pinch in the supermarket aisles, with the price of flour up 24% and the cost of eggs up 30%. On top of this, mortgage rates are the highest in 20 years, just over 7%. Republicans made the economy one of their main campaign issues, but for some voters it's not the be-all and end-all.
People are more worried about inflation, but they don't understand that we have global inflation, and it's easy to point the finger and just look at gas prices and lose the big picture.
The big picture shows that the U.S. economy isn't doing so bad. Household wealth, for example, has increased by $32 trillion since the start of the pandemic. Jobs aren't hard to come by, with unemployment at just 3.7%. GDP, meanwhile, was up 2.6% in the third quarter. The figures beat expectations, but growth has still stalled over the last year. A Reuters Ipsos poll showed that a large majority of voters from both sides of politics felt worse off financially or no better compared to last year.
The U.S. midterm elections, of course, do not include a race for president, but the outcome is often seen as a referendum on the current leader. Joe Biden was not that visible on the campaign trail this time around, and there is a reason for that. Despite his accomplishments, polls show that Biden does not have a majority of support from the American public, as you, Monty, found out.
From action on climate change to gun control to overseeing the biggest vaccine rollout in U.S. history, Joe Biden has a list of accomplishments he can point to during his first 2 years in office. Republicans were able to block items on his agenda, including voting rights protections and abortion access. But he managed to keep campaign promises on forgiving student debt, lowering the price of prescription drugs, and appointing the first black woman to the U.S. Supreme Court. And importantly, the passage of a bipartisan infrastructure bill, the largest in American history. On the foreign policy front, he has been credited with uniting NATO allies and the West against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. But all of it hasn't served him so well in the realm of public opinion, with the polls showing his job approval hovering around 43%. And it's had an effect on the campaign trail. While welcomed by some, other Democratic candidates wanted Biden nowhere near their states.
Do you want President Biden to come to Ohio and publicly campaign with you in this final lap?
No, I won't be asking the president to come in.
Political analysts say, despite Biden's accomplishments, voters are consumed with concerns about inflation and that historically the president and his party lose support halfway through his term. Additionally, there are persistent concerns about Biden's age. He turns 80 later this month and has not officially said whether he'll make another White House bid. Polls show 3 in 5 Democratic voters want him to run in 2024.
That report from Monte Francis, who's with me still on set. Monty, what do the election results say about Joe Biden and his real influence on Democratic voters?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because right there we saw in that piece Tim Ryan of Ohio basically telling President Biden, stay out of Ohio, I want nothing to do with you. Well, Tim Ryan ended up losing that race against J.D. Vance, the Republican. At the same time, you see that one of the few Democrats who actually asked for Biden's help on the campaign trail, John Fetterman, won his race against Dr. Oz. So there might have been a bit of a miscalculation on the part of some Democrats as to whether they should solicit or invite President Biden's help.
All right, Monte, thank you so much for that. Thank you for all of your hard work on the U.S. midterms. Thanks to you for watching. We'll see you soon for the next Inside the Americas.
Hello, I'm Annette Young, the host of the 51%. And in this week's special edition, we're here in the US as it gears up for the midterms. But with the Supreme Court having made that decision to roll back the constitutional right in accessing an abortion, these midterms have indeed become a milestone election for American women voters, especially here in the southern state of Kentucky.
The 51%, presented by Annette Young on France 24 and France24.com.
Это самая же игра в управлении. А так, вычисление противника, это, можно сказать, первая задача.
Вони, у нас, напевно, що єдина відмінність від того, що у нас є Starlink інтернет.
Да.
Ми можемо робити трансляції з коптера. Вони цього не можуть. У них весь зв'язок іде по рації, мобільні телефони і тому подібне.
Видео мы снимали, когда они пытались попытка наступления, прорыва, там было много техники. И мы, естественно, круглосуточно летаем, мы заранее заметили, что едет колонна. Командованию передали, что идет наступление, команда сразу приняла и все.
Технология впереди. Можно сказать, что мы опережаем противника совместно с дронами. Плюс у нас связь, Starlink есть. Это на первом месте, можно сказать, связь.